people talk about learning by doing, and I think that can be confusing because if we just do, learning doesn't follow. We have to do in a way that's conscious about both performing and learning in order to get both results. And so that's what I call learning while doing. And I think that's the biggest opportunity we have. I mean, there's the dedicated learning zone where we're only learning. That's super valuable, but it is a big investment, and people are really busy with getting a lot of things done. So I think the biggest opportunity, because people talk about learning by doing, and I think that can be confusing because if we just do, learning doesn't follow. We have to do in a way that's conscious about both performing and learning in order to get both results. And so that's what I call learning while doing. And I think that's the biggest opportunity we have. I mean, there's the dedicated learning zone where we're only learning. That's super valuable, but it is a big investment, and people are really busy with getting a lot of things done. So I think the biggest opportunity, because we're spending so much time doing things, is to shift the way we do things so that we do them and generate insights and new strategies along the way, which in the service of the performance that we want. Spending so much time doing things is to shift the way we do things so that we do them and generate insights and new strategies along the way, which in the service of the performance that we want to do.
I think learning is what you do every day. And when you stop learning, I think you stop living.
We are moving into a world where there are less answers and so many more questions.
Learners will be the ones that will inherit the world, not the knowers.
We live in times where change is always present and transformation is a never-ending endeavor. Mindset, skills and expertise matter more than status and resources. It's time for a new normal for learning.
It's time for a new normal for learning. Welcome everyone to our second episode of Good Morning L&D in this crazy year 2025. And I mean, I don't know how you all started into this new year, but as much I got from our clients, but also from our own business, is that this whole kind of crisis years, or start in the year with those geopolitical conflicts, with new market shifts in technologies, all of this is somehow also pushing on the topic of learning, and I think this led us also to our title for our session today, whether growth mindset and learning is something that can help a company in such a situation, is really business critical, or rather it's something which is on this list of topics that gets delayed or deprioritized, and so I'm super happy that you all join our conversation today on this kind of question, whether growth mindset and learning is actually really business critical in times like these, or whether it's just a nice to have topic. And I'm super happy to have a very special guest, a dear friend, here with us today to talk about these topics, because for me it was super important to bring someone in who really knows these topics in and out, and who in that sense is one of the thought fathers of the whole concept of growth mindset. He researched together with Carol Dweck, we all know her from the book Mindset, and from this great transformation story at Microsoft. He researched together with her in Stanford the topic, and since then is also bringing this topic to management conferences, to companies all over the world. Wrote a great book about it, The Performance Paradoxon. Welcome with me, Eduardo. Hi, Eduardo, and welcome.
Hi, Moritz. So great to see you, my friend.
Yeah, so cool to have you. And fun fact, often people ask us, why did you call this format Good Morning L&D, even though it's happening in the afternoon? And there are two answers. One is because Good Morning L&D is meant to be this wake-up call for L&D professionals to go new ways when it comes to learning. That's one argument. And the other argument is because I really love Robin Williams, and as a child I saw his film Good Morning Vietnam, and since then I was always dreaming about doing a format, something similar to him. And 30 years later, here we are, and Eduardo is actually on the West Coast, so it's very early for him. So for you, it's really hopefully a good morning.
Yes, it is a good morning talking to you, and as I always really enjoy. And I didn't know the meaning of Good Morning L&D, so thanks for sharing that. And it reminds me also of the meaning of Forever Day One. It's just like the start and how we start doing things differently. So I love that kind of theme and energy that you bring into the world.
Cool. Well, so you see, we are warming up and getting, straight into our conversation. I have already the first question prepared for Eduardo, but before we start into the questions, I just want to encourage everyone out there listening to us right now to bring in your questions. I will remind you during the sessions again and again, because you know best what you don't know, right? So bring in those questions so we can really integrate them into our flow. And with that, you can really get most out of our session today. So, Eduardo, let's kick it off with some let's say basics. Everyone is talking about growth mindset. At least it feels to me that way. And I feel also there are many different, let's say, understandings of what growth mindset actually means. I've been once speaking to a CEO of a large corporate, and he says, well, growth mindset is all about revenue growth. We want our people to grow revenue, and that's why they have to have this growth mindset. And we both know that's not what it's originally meant, so since you have researched the topic, since you have spent so much time on this topic of growth mindset, how would you define it? What is growth mindset to you?
Sure. So there is a lot of misconception, positive energy and excitement and enthusiasm about growth mindset, which is great, but then also a lot of misconception, which then leads us to not actually develop the thing that we think we're going to be developing. So first, mindset. Any mindset is like a belief or an assumption that affects how we perceive things. It affects our thoughts, our emotions, and our behaviors. And a growth mindset in particular is a belief, like any mindset, and it's a belief about the nature of human beings. Sometimes we think that growth mindset is working hard or persevering or having high expectations, but a growth mindset specifically is a belief that people can change, that our abilities and qualities are malleable and we can develop them over time. So if we think, for example, people are either natural leaders or not, that would be a fixed mindset about leadership, right? Or if you think that introversion or extroversion is fixing people, that's a fixed mindset about those things, versus those things can change would be a growth mindset. And it's not that like one thing is good and one thing is bad. This is also, that would be too simple, but it is understanding that these different beliefs have different consequences on how we think.
Mm-hmm. And why would you say that this topic or why would you say this topic got so much relevance or so much attention in the recent years? And do you believe that this will hold on, given the time we live in right now and what's happening in the world these days?
Yeah, so I do believe it will hold on, but there's a risk to that. I'll talk about that. But how people got so excited about it initially, when Carol Dweck's book came out, it wasn't an instant bestseller. And I partnered with her. I co-founded Mindset Works with her, and which focuses on schools and helping schools develop a growth mindset culture. And initially, she was evangelizing the book, like giving a lot of talks, and then we were doing the same thing and reaching out to schools. And one of the things that we used to create excitement, which worked really well but also backfired, was that we focused on some really interesting research that shows that when adults or parents tell their kids that they're smart, there's negative consequences with that. So a child does something really well without effort, without mistakes, and then we say, you're so smart, you're so natural, and we do it with our best intentions. But what actually happens, they might raise their confidence in that moment, but they're also developing a fixed mindset. They're thinking, people who succeed is because of something that's fixing them, that's intelligence. And what happens is they stop taking on challenges. When things get hard, they give up because they don't want to, they don't want to feel like they're not smart and to think that other people think that they're not smart. And so that, I think that gathered a lot of excitement from parents and from teachers because it was counterintuitive, right? It was like, oh, we're doing this thing that we think is a really good thing, but it's actually creating negative consequences. And then that created a lot of interest. But on the other hand, it also, how it backfired was that people started equating growth mindset with praising effort, right? And so they forgot, they weren't clear about what growth mindset actually is. And then they started, for example, praising too much and praising effort too much, even when kids weren't working hard or when their hard work was not being effective. And so that's initially why and how Like people got excited about growth mindset, but then eventually businesses started becoming really interested in it because they realized this is a fast and complex and fast changing world. And we need to develop, like in your intro video, and like you mentioned, we need to develop this culture of lifelong learning and experimentation and feedback and talking about mistakes. And so because of how relevant it is to the modern world, and that some very large companies are really prioritizing this at the top level, then and they've been very successful when they do that, then I think the excitement has grown and grown and more. The risk is that if growth mindset continues to be kind of fuzzy and distorted, then people might think that they're implementing growth mindset when they're not, and then they might not be successful, and then growth mindset might fade away. But I do think that people are getting better, and organizations are getting better and better at understanding what growth mindset is and finding ways to develop it. And I do think that is something that is going to continue to expand over time.
Yeah, you just mentioned it, that I think it really, when it comes to implementing growth mindset and learning and so on in a large organization, it really has to start at the top of the company, right? And it's just a question of whether those people really get the concept and see how it can help them and help their people in the organization, right, to master the challenges they're in. And when I think about a lot of L&D professionals from my network, I think that's where they also struggle with, right? Because in Germany maybe, but I guess also in the world, managers are very much, KPI driven. In Germany, we have a lot of engineers, and they are looking always for this rather, let's say, numbers and the scientific proof. So I'm directing a little bit to our topic today, which is this question: how do we, how do you convince those people that growth mindset is not just a nice to have, it's not just a soft topic, that they should have heard once. No, that it's really a topic they have to, embrace and work on and really integrate into their companies. How do you do that?
Yeah, I love your thoughts on that too. But to respond to that, I think, first of all, I agree with you that the most powerful way to start this is when it starts at the top, like you said, because then the organization sets the priorities, and this is part of the priority. And when the senior leaders are really modeling this and sending the message that these learning behaviors are valued and rewarded, then it leads everybody to emulate that, and it creates the conditions to create the systems for the right rewards to be in place, both social rewards and other rewards. So I love that scenario when, at the top of the organization fosters this as a strategy. But I also think any of us can focus on what is within our control or what we can influence. And we can start there, and that can be really powerful. And I've seen organizations where, like, a manager in the floor of a manufacturing plant, started creating a real, very strong learning culture with her team. And for example, and they started like seeing great growth in their metrics and in their productivity. And eventually, a couple of years later, when it eventually became a strategic priority for the organization, they could point to this as data for the organization to embrace this and to have a steeper, faster learning curve for the organization to learn from these pockets of excellence, and that we're further ahead in creating a learning culture. So I do think any of us has like a lot of power to work first just within ourselves, and then with our teams, and then within what we can influence. But to your point about like how can we influence senior leaders or influence other leaders, I think influence is a complicated and complex topic, and there's a lot of books written about it, and I think it has a lot of factors going into it, like what's your relationship with a person, what's the level of trust, how much do they respect you, to what extent do you have common goals. But I think a strength of growth mindset is that it has so many benefits to so many things, that whatever the goal is of the other person or the organization or the division or the leader, growth mindset can play a role in that. And so in helping, in getting through conversations, through questions, through reflections, or through sharing, it can be different modalities, but I think it tends to involve connecting the importance and the role of growth mindset to the goals that the other people already have. What do you think, Moritz?
Well, I agree. I mean, we see this also in our work, that growth mindset can also start on a team level, right? Where a team decides, like, we want to grow as a team, and we want to behave also differently in that sense. And I always, when I talk or introduce the whole concept to teams, I really try to bring it down to this very granular level of a meeting room, right? How do you enter the meeting room? And it's a big difference whether I enter the meeting room with this belief, that it's about being good, or the belief it's about getting better, right? Because when I enter this meeting room with the belief it's about being good, I will never ask a stupid question. I will, in that sense, always look a little bit critical to people who might have come to better results than I, and so on and so forth, right? Versus when I enter the meeting room with a growth mindset in that sense, and this idea, hey, it's about getting better, and this is why we come together as a team here. Well, then I will of course ask any stupid question, because I'm not here to prove myself. I'm here to learn. I'm here to get answers that I don't have for myself. This is why I work in a team. Or I entered this meeting room because I want to learn from others. And if someone has a better answer, or someone is, in that sense, more successful than I am, then that shouldn't be something I should be scared of, but rather feel drawn to and try to find inspiration here. So I think, as you said, it's definitely something that can start on a team level, and something that can start in every team meeting if you want so. But then again, I feel, that sometimes it needs the time for that. It needs sometimes also maybe resources for that, to bring in, a trainer, or bring in some fresh ideas and perspective changes. And that, is something that, especially in times of high pressure, many organizations, scratch out as the first thing on the card. And so this is why I was asking, right? How would you then, stand on a stage and be, no, guys, I know you all have it on your list, but this time you really shouldn't scratch it out, because, right? And then what would be your arguments, or what would be, those examples, as you've shared it from this manufacturing team, that really convince management that they should be careful here with the red pencil?
Yes. So, I am lucky in that when I am on a stage, people brought me in, the organization brought me in because their top leaders see this as strategic. And so most people in the room might not be familiar with it, but there's a message from the senior leader saying, this is really important. So, we brought Eduardo in to hear from him. And so, but some of the things that I do that I think others can do too is, again, so starting with what people's goals are already, and how can I connect to those goals and help them achieve those goals? And then what is my objective? And the objective in influencing and shifting people might be different depending on where people are, what your level of influence is. And then coming up with an intervention, right? Like it could look I think in a lot of different ways. Like one way that I've seen people share this successfully is to share like a couple of pieces of content on, hey, I just watched this talk or read this article that I thought was really interesting. I could really help our team, I think. Wondering if you would take a look at it, and then I would love your thoughts on it. And that can be done one-on-one, or it can be done in a team meeting, but giving the other person or group of people the space to actually honestly share their opinion, rather than, even if it's top down, right? Even if it's top down, we don't, it's not just like, hey, here's how we need to think, and here's how we need to act, but giving people a space of, here's something that we think is important. What do you think of it? And how do you think we're doing about that? And do you have any concerns? And if you are on board with this, where do you think we should start? How can we collaborate to get started on this, and to start getting better? And I think that tends to be very effective, because then you learn what other people's initial take is and what their concerns are. Maybe they don't understand it yet, or maybe they do understand it yet, but they see other constraints. Maybe that constraint might be a short-term constraint where, hey, I understand this, but we have this big milestone in 2 months and we just have to focus on that right now. And so you can say, okay, great. Like, how about we just focus on that right now? And how about we look at this in 2 months, right? So then you can start learning where people are and starting to negotiate and then get some commitments, hopefully, that then you can get back to and say, okay, like we said this was important. Let's get to this. Or if we're not getting to this, I'm concerned that we said this was important, but we're not getting to it. And I think it's just through conversations.
Mm-hmm. Maybe also, talking about conversations, getting also our audience here on board of our conversation. We have a first question from Petra, who is head of learning and development at Wieland. It's a family-owned business here in Germany. They're in the copper industry. I know them quite well. And I think the question she's referring to is well, we have this engineers kind of culture, and they always question things and the numbers and the KPIs. What, when you are asked about, so how do you know this is really working? How do you know growth mindset is working and this whole learning topic is working? How do you respond to a question like this from a manager, for example?
Yeah, I think that first kind of growth mindset. First, I think metrics are really powerful. So if there's something that we can measure our progress on with a metric, that's a wonderful thing. Technically, growth mindset is really hard to measure on a regular basis because it's a belief. And so if you ask people, do you believe that people can become smarter, for example, then once they learn that this is what the right answer is and what you want, especially if there's any rewards or punishments, even if very small, associated with that, then it's going to distort the results. We can measure people's mindsets if it's very irregular, if it's kind of before a one-time event, or if it's every, but I do think that you can measure, get metrics on progress on actually something that's, really important, which is the behaviors, right? It's like, if you want to focus on soliciting feedback, a culture of soliciting feedback, and that's going to have so many great results around learning, then you can start measuring that, right? You can start asking people, like, for their perceptions and the extent to which their colleagues frequently solicit feedback, like at least like how often do they get somebody else to solicit their feedback, for example. That's something that could be a measure. Or if you're trying to do more experiments in a certain way, you can measure like the experiments you're doing. And at the end of the day, you want to actually increase the KPIs, the performance KPIs. There's like, whether it's sales or whatever it is, all these leading behaviors, these learning behaviors should lead to an increase in performance, and you want to see that increase as well. And so to the extent that you're focusing on learning behaviors that you can measure, you can have those. But also that what should follow is also the increase in performance. And if that's not following, then we have to change our strategies and how we're going about the learning systems that we're creating. How about you? Have you run across systems to measure progress over time?
Well, I'm familiar with this case around Microsoft, and I think that goes very much in your direction, right? That I think they measured how often employees ask others for help and how often others would, evaluate a person's, ability or openness to help. So that's something they really measured, and I think they made it also really a significant part of the variable compensation at Microsoft, because they said this is the way how people show a growth mindset, right? By being open and asking for help, and not knowing and knowing what they don't know, and that is one thing. And the other thing is, of course, then also to take the time to help others when they have a question or when they're stuck. And that would, I think, very much go in your direction. But then again, Kevin Hogan, the CHRO from Microsoft, who has been also driving for Satya Nadella, I think the whole growth mindset initiative at the end said that it comes down to revenue growth. It comes down to technology adoption rates with cloud, with AI, and so on, where they in the end really see a reflection of whether they live a growth mindset in a certain business area or not. So yeah, I think that goes very hand in hand, I feel, with your latest thinking.
Yeah, I love that example.
Yeah. But thank you, Petra, for the question. And for everyone else in the call, yeah, just jump in, bring in your questions. Maybe also, you know, coming from your day-to-day realities in your organization, what are the hurdles that stand in between you and the organization and the growth mindset, or, you know, more learning? I think that's really something we hopefully can then discuss with Eduardo. And I'm pretty sure you have many more examples since you are traveling a lot with this topic, or have been traveling a lot also with this topic around the world. Yeah. Just to maybe finish this loop around growth mindset, and I think we're already in the middle of it. Let's say we have the management on board, they are committed, and they want, you know, growth mindset to be, you know, the #1 priority in their company culture. What does an organization need to do to foster or really implement growth mindset? Is there a certain kind of list or a framework that has, you know, maybe developed over the last years with all the observations you had in the field?
Well, first of all, I think that sometimes organizations get a little bit scared to get started on this journey because senior leaders are sometimes new to this topic. They might feel that they don't have a full handle of it, that they themselves need to do some work as lifelong learners, to develop as lifelong learners. They might fear a little bit that in this new, if the organization transformed, they might not be the right kind of senior leader. So there might be fear. But what I would say is that is also an opportunity to model learning and to partner with people to go on the learning journey with them, which is what growth mindset is about. In a growth mindset, perfection is not attainable. Perfection is a fixed mindset idea, because perfection kind of implies that we can't improve anymore. And that's a fixed mindset idea, right? And so the idea that we will always be continuing to improve, and we can start that right now. And that's what a growth mindset culture is about. And we don't have to be mastering the subject in order to get started. It's really important to notice. And that's at any level of the organization. So it usually, like you said, if the senior leader is on board, senior leadership is on board, having the senior leadership really reflect on what are the organization's values or guiding frameworks, the guiding language, and how are they going to frame what everybody does at work together every day, as part of that being working to continue to evolve ourselves and to grow ourselves, not just grow our business, not just improve our processes, which is important too, but also like grow ourselves, our ability, each one of us, our abilities and our qualities, and how like align on how to message that's going to be that's important, and that's going to be really important going forward, and a core of our culture, and it's what's going to lead us to success. And so how to message that, and then how to build systems and habits, or help people, guide them and give them ideas around what systems and habits can they foster to get the work done and to be more effective at getting the work done, but also to continuously improve, whether it is through experimentation or through like weekly meetings where people share what they're learning, or questions that they're unsure about, or mistakes and lessons from mistakes, whatever that is. And that can look very differently depending on different organizations. For some businesses, experimentation and data might be really helpful. For other businesses, kind of feedback and honest conversations might be, something that they focus on, or, learning from the outside world and experts. But those are, I think, some of the components that are important. What would you add to that?
Yeah, I think leaders are definitely play a critical role here in role modeling it, but also guiding their teams, I think, when it comes to learning, right? What are maybe the 1 or 2 projects of our backlog of 10 projects where it's okay if we don't, hit the nail at the first time, because we know that we're going to use a new tool here, or we know because we're going to, do something for the first time. And so learning is appreciated, iteration is appreciated, failing is appreciated. I think that's a role only a leader can take into, guide the team and prioritize the projects and tell them, where it's okay, if it's not perfect, to put it in your words. And then again, I feel also, besides all this enablement and development, I think it really needs also some structural changes, like in this example from Microsoft, where they really said, okay, we make it an integral part of our variable compensation, for example. We really try to measure this kind of behavior or this kind of behavior change in the organization, because at the end of the day, I think this is then something that is hard written, and it says, not, we don't just talk about it. It's not just lip service we're doing here. No, we really want to change this in the organization, and I think that's I think the tricky part also, how to find some more hard coded measures and elements in this whole kind of idea of growth mindset implementation to make it stick to an organization.
Yeah, and I think I agree, and something that ties into what you're saying is that at the beginning, people might be unsure whether leadership is actually like serious about this and it's actually going to reward these new behaviors, and whether they even understand it. But whatever it is, like, and so when a journey like this starts, there are a lot of people who jump in really excited, because really people love the opportunity to learn and develop. But there's also people who stand back, right? And they're not going to be the first ones to jump in. Even if they say they're interested, they might be more cautious and see what happens when people do this, what happens when people share their mistakes, what happens when people share their uncertainties, or when they provide, wild ideas. And so I think another kind of trap that I see is that often people get hung up on the people who are not there, the people who are kind of the late adopters, and they focus their attention there, I think, too much. That happens a lot, versus like working with a lot of people who are really excited and jumping in and collaborating with them and building on that momentum while inviting others along the way. And then it gives others the data and the conviction to then start taking some risks and start jumping in.
Yeah, but that's a big change for most L&D teams that I know, who are still, running L&D in this idea one size fits all. Like, we have this one training for everyone, we have this one engagement for everyone, and we want to cater the whole organization. But with that, they usually end at one compromise after the other, and this in the end, I think disappoints those front runners that you have been talking about, who felt like now finally something is happening here and we're moving forward. While at the same time, are maybe also not really moving those late followers or even deniers who, in the end, I just very cynic in that sense, and will criticize anything that will be thrown towards them. And so I think it's what you just said is so helpful to break free from this one-size-fits-all approaches that usually L&D teams are used to work on, because they want to serve the whole organization, and instead focus then on those front-runner groups and get them going and those early adopters joining in. And usually then the majority sees, oh, they're doing it and they are actually taking benefit from it. And so maybe I should try it out too.
Yeah, I think I agree. And something that makes me think of that I think is a way to approach this challenge is Professor John Kotter talks about it as, he calls it, dual operating system. And so the challenge that he's tackling with that is that, and I see a lot of organizations struggling with it and transitioning now, where in traditional strategic planning, at the top level, you would do kind of a maybe like a 2-month process once a year to really set strategy and to plan. And that is not working anymore because the world is changing so quickly, right? And so organizations are trying to figure out what is a different alternative to go about planning and execution. And so they come up with things like OKRs or other things. But one system is called dual operating system, where you have the hierarchy and kind of the more traditional way to get things done, to make sure that you get the core work done, and that you execute, and you use things that you have proven in the past to work. And at the same time, you give people who he calls volunteers. So it doesn't have to be everybody, but it's people who have the energy, who have ideas to try something new. You explicitly give them kind of the permission, the latitude, the encouragement to try those ideas and to run with it, and at some point then to bring it to their leaders and to talk about it and to, you know, get the leaders on board, but explicitly saying that there's two parallel systems that we're all working on. One is to perform and execute, and the other one's to learn. And that kind of, that is something that we can all be working at the same time, and separating those things and giving space for those things can be helpful.
That's a perfect bridge towards your book, The Performance Paradox. I definitely want to talk about that as well, because I mean, what I observed, we invited Eduardo for management conferences, you know, at Siemens or Bertelsmann here in Germany. And one model I think that helped leaders, you refer to that as a framework or a guideline, companies usually need, and also leaders need, you know, to navigate. I feel like this performance paradoxum and what you just shared, this differentiation between the performance and the learning zone is something that helps leaders a lot, and that's also what made you somehow famous at TED. I think that this famous TED talk from 2016. And I felt before we jump into the performance paradoxum, we just take a little glimpse into your TED talk. For those of you who haven't seen it, it's really worth looking. I hope we got a good kind of trailer here.
Trying to do our best at whatever we do, whether it's our job, family, school, or anything else. I feel that way. I try my best. But some time ago, I came to a realization that I wasn't getting much better at the things I cared most about, whether it was being a husband or a friend or a professional or teammate. And I wasn't improving much at those things, even though I was spending a lot of time working hard at them. What I've learned is that the most effective people and teams in any domain do something we can all emulate. They go through life deliberately alternating between two zones, the learning zone and the performance zone. The learning zone is when our goal is to improve. Then we do activities designed for improvement, concentrating on what we haven't mastered yet, which means we have to expect to make mistakes, knowing that we will learn from them. That is very different from what we do when we're in our performance zone, which is when our goal is to do something as best as we can, to execute. Then we concentrate on what we have already mastered, and we try to minimize mistakes. Both of these zones should be part of our lives, but being clear about when we want to be in each of them, with what goal, focus, and expectations, helps us better perform and better improve.
Yeah.
Haven't seen that in a long time.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, when I saw it the first time, I wouldn't have thought to sit with you in such a kind of, online session and talk about it, because you were like, wow, Manhattan Beach and TED, right? So yeah, once again, thank you for being with us today, Eduardo. But no, coming back to this idea of the performance paradoxum, how did it come up? And I feel like coming back to those management conferences at Siemens or Bertelsmann, leaders can work with it. That's something they can hold on to. That's, you know, something they can use. At least I feel like, you know, when I saw how they reacted to you also during those conferences, that or what they took out of the session with you, that was something they could really use, and it helped them to change their perspective on performance and learning.
Yeah, Siemens is an example of an organization that has embedded this framework throughout their L&D programs, but also in senior leadership and what they're doing. And I do find that people find it to be really helpful because it's very actionable. And so how it first came out was me learning from Carol Dweck and from other colleagues, Lisa Blackwell, and from research, Anders Ericsson, and connecting a lot of things. We just talked about kind of John Cotter's and the dual operating system. But one of the big things that I was trying to do is, when I was doing workshops with senior leaders, I was talking about deliberate practice, which is Anders Ericsson's research, where, you know, if you focus on one very specific skill, like sub-skill, for 30 minutes or an hour, doing a lot of iterations with feedback in between repetitions, that's what leads to world-class violinists or golf, you know, players, or, you know, lots of other things. But people found it to be really interesting, but also not that actionable, because in deliberate practice, as framed like that, you have to spend a lot of time working on each specific skill, and the complexity and multidimensionality of work and life. That strategy might not always be the best strategy, as opposed to feedback or experimentation or other things, or just kind of reflecting on performance and mistakes. And so in trying to ask questions and looking at the research, I realized that deliberate practice was a subset of something bigger. It was a learning zone strategy, where we are trying what we haven't done before. We're trying new strategies. We're going beyond the known, and we're doing things that may or may not work. And that's very different from doing our best to get the work done. And the thing is that I think the reason that this resonates so much is that people are working really hard to do the best that they can and the best that they know how. And we have the assumption, and this is the assumption I had, that that's the way to succeed and that's to improve. If I just show up at work and work really hard to do the best I can, that's the best way to improve. But I realized that actually, no, there's a different type of effort that is involved for improvement. And these two things are important to clarify and to both have as part of our lives, right? I've recently, my book was published in Chinese, and they asked me to write a preface. And so I asked ChatGPT, hey, what are some ideas about some things that I should talk about in this preface? And one of the things that it came up with, which I loved so much, was making an analogy with the philosophy of yin yang, where there are opposing forces that are also complementary, and that you need to have in harmony, that both sides are important. And I thought that was brilliant. So now I see that not only in my work, but everywhere. And that's the thing, we can over-index on too much learning and we don't get enough done, or we can over-index on too much performance and then we don't get enough improvement. And we tend to, some people over-index on learning, and sometimes I do that, but a lot of people over-index on the performance zone. There are psychological and societal reasons for that.
Yeah, and I think just seeing this model also, with this circle, learning performance zone, and how it, somehow it feels like the circle of life, right? It makes a lot of sense, right? But then again, in day-to-day reality, as you just said it's so difficult. And also what I observe also with myself is especially in times when I would need more learning zone, right? When the pressure is really high, and because there's a new client, there's a new project, there's a new whatever, I rather tend to go even more in a performance zone and get into something I think you also described in the book as a chronic performance, right? And how do you get people out of this again, right? If I think about a leader, if I think about an L&D team, trying to get people more in this balanced situation between performance and learning zone, how do you regulate this? There's no remote control, I guess, right, for performance and learning zone, right? At least I haven't seen it. Maybe you found it.
Not yet. I think of the balance as an average over time. So like average over the year. And sometimes we'll have seasons where we are more almost exclusively on, sometimes only on performance mode. Sometimes there might be times that we can invest more in the learning zone. Hopefully most of the time we are in a good cadence with them balanced. But I think it's okay, if there's a crunch time, big milestone, and we haven't figured out a way to embed a little bit of learning in how we work. I think it's okay to focus on performance, but the problem is if it's always that's what I call chronic performance, then that becomes a problem. So I think some ways to at least get started, if somebody's struggling with that, is to start with things that are easy but frequent. So something that doesn't take much time at all, but ideally you do on a daily basis. Ideally in the morning, because then it primes a growth mindset, it primes the learning zone, and it starts shifting how we think throughout the day. It starts shifting a little bit what we pay attention to when we're working, what questions we ask, what things we try. And the more we do it, the more neurons fire together, they wire together, they start, changing the way we see the world and we think. And so we become better and better learners over time. But the key is to activate that frequently. And we, just like New Year's resolutions, if we try to say, okay, we're going to do this big thing, then sometimes we just don't do anything. And so I think it's important to, or is, an effective strategy to start with things that are easy and frequent. Mm-hmm. Do you have any perspective on that?
Well, I would love to hear some maybe concrete examples, right? I mean, if I imagine, again, those leaders, who are part of your conversation and now trying to implement what they just learned, and they got this concept, it makes total sense to them, performance learning zone, I have one, my team has one, and now I have to somehow manage and balance this. And you say, well, start with those small steps, those rather atomic habits in the morning. Ideally, what are these concrete habits, for a leader, for example, or anyone to embrace more learning zone in their day-to-day, life, but then also on a team level?
Yeah. So I think the small atomic habit, tiny habit that I love the most for this is like a morning habit to remind ourselves as an individual what I am working to improve. So growth mindset sometimes is another way that people think about growth mindset sometimes is how we react to mistakes, which is totally fine, but it is reactive, it's responsive. And the most powerful form of growth mindset is proactive, is where our constant evolution is the default. And so what are the default habits that we do always in order to ensure that constant evolution? And that, so often, a lot of people, myself included, in the morning, we identify what are the big, most important things that I want to accomplish today, right? There's something, a lot of people have a morning habit to do something. And so embedding, is a very small and quick thing of what am I working on right now to proactively improve? Ideally, how, right? Or how am I going about it? So that's one thing to consider. Sharing what that is with your team is, because you talk about at the team level, then that becomes super powerful for a few reasons. One is there's social accountability. You're committing to something socially, and hopefully you're going to keep that conversation going. People are going to ask you how it's going, and that's going to motivate you more to keep yourself accountable and keep each other accountable. And second, it's going to allow them to support you in that, right? It's allowing to support them to say, hey, I'm noticing this change that you're doing, and I think it's working well. Or, hey, here's something to think about, giving you feedback and ideas and reinforcement and encouragement. And you can work and collaborate together on that. And if everybody's doing that, if everybody has something that they're working to improve and sharing with their teammates, that's what creates, a learning culture. And the most powerful culture in an organization is the team culture. A whole organization can have a strong culture. Even if it does, there's a lot of variability within teams because we have different norms and understandings and ways of interacting with the people we work closest with. And so it's in shaping what that looks like that we can form a really strong learning culture. But also, it's in the service of performance and accountability. We have a lot of things to get done. And so if we're spending too much time learning and we're not getting results, that's part of that gives a reason to think about, okay, we are learning cool things, but it's not actually changing our end results. So what do we do differently in order to make sure that it does? And it's an iterative, ongoing conversation to always get better.
Yeah. We have 13 more minutes to go, and I just want to heat up or fire up our chat and the comments and questions. So we have 13 minutes more with Eduardo. Please feel free to share your questions, your thoughts, comments, so that we can integrate them and use the time we have with Eduardo to bring those points also into the discussion. And meanwhile, somebody might still be typing in their questions. I like this question from Hannes here, who said that a lot of partners feel that today they mostly have to perform in things they have never done before in this fast-moving world. Are there still these two zones, or is the learning zone in that sense increasing? And I think that brings us also back to the question from the very beginning, right? Whether this whole topic of growth mindset, lifelong learning is, just a trend that will be somehow gone, or whether it's just still getting started.
Yeah, so I completely agree with the comment, and that we have to get things done in ways that we haven't done before and try new things, and in order to perform, in order to do things, and that creates an opportunity. So one way to think about this is think about these two bubbles. One is the learning zone and one is the performance zone. There's also an overlap between the two when you're doing both learning and performing, which is what the question is about. And I call that learning while doing. So people talk about learning by doing, and I think that can be confusing, because if we just do, learning doesn't follow. We have to do in a way that's conscious about both performing and learning in order to get both results. And so that's what I call learning while doing. And I think that's the biggest opportunity we have. I mean, there's the dedicated learning zone where we're only learning. That's super valuable, but it is a big investment, and people are really busy with getting a lot of things done. So I think the biggest opportunity, because we're spending so much time doing things, is to shift the way we do things so that we do them and generate insights and new strategies along the way, which in the service of the performance that we want to do. So I totally agree with the comment, but learning while doing is different than purely performing, and it's different than purely learning. So in purely performing, you're expecting everything to go great. Sometimes people say we need to take risks, but if somebody takes risks and it doesn't go as hoped, then people get mad. Like that just fosters pure performance, right? So in learning while doing, you have to be planning not only how to get the work done, but also what hypothesis you're going to test, and how are you going to know whether those things work better. You have to be trying new things and shifting, even if it's small things, like changing the way you work. If you're always doing the same thing in the same way, you're not going to get better. You need to be soliciting other people's ideas, not just going with what you know. And often when you find a solution to a problem, it is often fruitful to stay a little bit longer, asking some follow-up questions to improve the idea or to generate an even better idea. So those are different ways than just focusing on, let's just get the work done as best as we know how right now. And so, yeah, I absolutely agree. And this is the biggest opportunity so for example, as a keynote speaker, when I'm on stage, I'm performing, but often I'm trying something new that I haven't done before. Like, I've done a lot of things that I've done before, but I'm also engaging creativity and trying a new activity or a new way to explain something in service of the particular group. So I use the specific situation. In my case, it's the people who are there, their context and their goals. And inspired by that, I try something new because I think that new thing is going to increase my performance in that event. Often I might learn something like the activity, I didn't have enough time, or I had too much time for the activity, or something about how people responded to a particular thing in a way I didn't expect. But it is inspired by the new thing and the new situation that then I can try something different that I hypothesize is going to work even better than what I have done in the past. So yeah. and then we need to also so the fact that we have to perform in new ways is a great opportunity to do this, but we have to do it in a conscious and deliberate way in order for us to actually be able to benefit from it and to have it lead to actual learning and improvement.
I think that's super interesting, and I love this kind of rephrase of learning while doing or learning while working, because I feel like also if you look on all those future skill reports, like from the World Economic Forum, many skills that are mentioned there, like problem solving, creativity, collaboration, grit, things like this aren't things that I can learn in that sense, theoretically, that are only things that I can, learn by doing or while working. So I believe also looking at all those future skills that we're, seeing listed, I think these aren't things I can learn by remembering. These are things I can only learn by practice. And what I really loved was how you said, well, this needs certain conditions. Like, for example, something I always realize, it needs then also the time to reflect what I have just done, right? I mean, for example, when you try out something new in your talk, it needs this, I don't know, 30 minutes afterwards on your way back home or whenever, when you realize, okay, so how did it go? How did it work? Let's look at the videotape. How did the audience react, right? And this is then also where this learning happens in the flow of your work, but it still needs then the time, for example, to reflect, to receive feedback, ask, you know, someone from the audience to mirror that. So yeah, I think learning in the flow of work is super powerful, and it's I think super future headed when it comes to all those future skills. But it needs this deliberate, you know, idea also in your day to day, which is super. I think a super big challenge for many people to make time to get the right people, you know, to receive feedback, to have a culture, whether on a team or an organizational level, that really supports this.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I absolutely also agree with your reflection on how important reflection is. We don't learn from experience. We learn from reflecting on experience. We don't learn from mistakes. We learn from reflecting on mistakes. And that, I think, also applies to our experiences, but I think it also applies to learning from content like podcasts or books or articles. There's so much content out there that sometimes I think we just try to consume as much content as possible and don't actually spend a little bit of time thinking about what's the most important idea that I got out of this, and how do I actually remember it and consolidate it into my brain by coming back to it. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity also in reducing the amount of content, and the reflection doesn't have to take a ton of time, whether it's from performance or from content, but it's like super important to actually benefit from it.
Since we have also a lot of leaders and people who are responsible for leadership development in our session, how would you say, what are the characteristics that leaders have to role model or also to learn in a way to really support continuous learning in their teams? Because I feel like they are somehow the make or break point in many team cultures, but also organizational cultures. And I think they realize the topic is becoming more important. Also, you know, by AI, I think many, you know, woke up in that sense. But what would you say are those characteristics they have to work on? What are the things they need to do in order to, you know, support their team in continuous learning?
So first, I think, is changing our mental models as a leader on myself, my identity is if I'm not there yet in terms of I see myself as a lifelong learner, someone who's always going to continue to improve, someone who can never be 100% sure of something. There's always a chance that I'm wrong, right? And I can always increase my understanding by whether it's from other people or from experiments. And so that shift in how I view myself and developing the habits to continue to evolve and improve is really important, because then you can understand this deeply and you can message it and support it in an authentic way. And again, if you're not there yet, it's just about starting the journey and collaborating with others together, because others are going through the same struggles and challenges, so you can partner with them, right? Second, I think, is, well, setting this clarity of what's important and the priorities for the organization, what the culture is like, and communicating that. And I think communicating clearly, making the implicit explicit. So leaders are 9 times more likely to under-communicate than over-communicate. And because we say something and we think that other people heard us and understood it and are going to remember it. And we also tend to think that other people think like us, and so we say less than we should. We're not explicit enough and think that other people will interpret our message in the same way that we understand it. So we have to be a lot more explicit in making our thinking explicit to other people, and then, you know, do it often. And then, like you said before, embedding it into the systems of the organization, including the reward systems, but also like what meetings look like, what meeting agendas look like, you know, and how the whole organization operates. What are there other qualities of leaders that you would add to that?
Many, but we only have 2 more minutes to go. And I have one last question for you that I really want to ask you. And I give the question to you, so you have some time to think about the answer while I do a little wrap up, and then we come to your answer and the closing. And the last question to you is, Eduardo, imagine that you are in the lift with the CEO of a company, and you have 30 seconds to convince him or her to invest in growth mindset and lifelong learning. What would you say? What would be your kind of elevator pitch to the CEO?
Yeah, if I'm interacting with a CEO that is not who didn't bring me in, who's not already there, I would ask a couple questions. I would ask, hey, what are your highest priorities for your organization, and how do you consider your culture is positioned to achieve those goals? And then they might say some things. Maybe learning is part of it, and maybe then if learning is part of it, I might ask, hey, like, are you familiar with growth mindset? And I'm curious, have you done work on growth mindset before? And start learning about that. If they don't mention kind of lifelong learning or growth mindset, I might ask a question about that. And, do you think that people are experimenting a lot or soliciting a lot of feedback? And is that, you think that will be important for you to achieve your goals? And so I would ask questions that would both lead the person to reflect and also have me learn about how they're thinking. But that'll be my approach.
Cool. Yeah. I think it resonates a lot. And yeah, it's all about connecting this learning and development topic really with the business strategy and with their kind of thinking, right? Where they want to go with the company, the transformation story they want to write, and then realizing that learning and growth mindset is not just a nice to have on that journey, but it's really the prerequisite to make this journey. So yeah, thank you, Eduardo. I think that also answers the big question of our session today. Growth mindset and learning and lifelong learning is definitely not just a nice to have. It is the prerequisite for any business transformation, and that's I think what you're experiencing, we are experiencing. Thank you for being with us, for taking the time so early in the morning. West Coast US time, and thank you all for joining in our session. It was really fun, and I'm looking forward to welcome you to our next and third session this year on Good Morning L&D.
Great to see you, Moritz. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eduardo.